Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Canon 211 on the Paleocrat Diaries. I'm your host, Jake Fowler. It's early here, but I have convinced Dr. Nicholas Healy to join me for what I hope to be quite an engaging discussion on St. Thomas Aquinas, Cardinal Henri de Lubac, and the ever-important topic of nature and grace. Dr. Healy, welcome to the program.
So, thank you very much, Jake. I'm very happy to join your distinguished list of guests, which include my friends Larry Feingold and Rodney Hauser. So it's
indeed,
it's great company to be in.
The honor is mine for sure, folks. If you're not aware, Dr. Healy has a doctorate from Oxford University and teaches at a pontifical faculty. That's not just your ordinary university, right? It's one thing to be a professor at a university. That's a high level of achievement. But at a pontifical faculty, this is the church herself granting degrees. And so to be entrusted with that mandate, as it were, that means the Roman Catholic Church has put a lot of trust into Dr. Healy. No pressure, Nick. He wrote his dissertation on the theology of Hans Urs von Balthasar and specializes in the area of metaphysics, theological anthropology, sacramental theology. We're going to kind of touch on all three of those probably because this article that you wrote, let me turn this music off. Okay, as much as I like it, it does just distract. So, ladies and gents, Nick Healy wrote in the spring 2022 issue of Communio an article. Let's see if I can grab the title, or if you remember the title. Here we are. Henri de Lubac and the Christian Mystery of Nature and Grace. So there are several sections. We may or may not get through all of them.
Sure.
But before we do, Dr. Healy, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning. Good. Yeah, it is. It's early here in Washington, but our semester just ended, and it's been a busy few weeks. We had actually a Communio editors meeting out at St. Patrick's Seminary in San Francisco. So I just returned from that. So I'm sort of still on California time, which is means it's even earlier in the morning. But happy to join you, and maybe as a way of entering into this discussion of nature and grace. I mean, it's an old question, but it's also a very current debate. But the question of nature and grace, in a certain way, it's as deep as the Christian mystery itself. In fact, the incarnation, in a certain way, is the key to thinking about the relationship between nature and grace. It's the paradigmatic instance of a union with an abiding distinction. Jesus Christ exists in two natures as one divine person. And so at one level, the question of nature and grace can get sort of technical, involving interpreting texts, especially from Thomas Aquinas, on the natural desire to see God. But it's always good to remember that in a certain way, it's the basic question of how the mystery of redemption relates to the first gift of creation. And every generation has to think through anew, in company with the tradition, the relationship between nature and grace.
Indeed. Well, it seems like when I was first introduced to this topic, maybe a decade ago or so, I sort of defaulted to what we can roughly call like the Thomistic or the Neo-Scholastic position. But the more I was exposed to the likes of Henri de Lubac and those who are more on his side of things, it became very difficult for me to maintain any sort of contrary ideas. And so what struck me is that, and we probably have another mutual friend, Richard Decloux, mentioned to me one time. He said, "Once you see it, you can't not see it." And it's like this intrinsic connection between these two realities, and once you perceive that it's there, you'll never again be able to throw your lot in totally with the Neo-Scholastics. So perhaps could you start by just providing an overview
Sure.
of what is this topic and why is it disputed?
Yeah, and maybe some sort of preliminary definition, some ideas first. So, what nature, in a certain way, refers to the gift of creation. We can follow Aristotle as a great guide here. Nature is an interior principle of motion and rest. So, if we think of my being as constituted by God the Creator, who I am and what I am as a rational being. Grace is a new gift that comes with the mystery of the incarnation, whereby God desires to share his own life and love. And the whole tradition recognizes a distinction between the gift of creation and this new gift that comes with the mystery of Christ. And if you because at a certain point in thinking about nature and grace, you might be tempted to the idea, well, wouldn't it be better just to really see them as simply one mystery, one reality, you might say. And what we miss there is, in a way, the newness of the incarnation, that the Son, begotten from the Father from all eternity, really enters history, assumes a human nature that is abidingly distinct from his divine nature. And we also, if we miss the incarnation, we miss the radicality of this gift that God wants to share with us, which the tradition calls theosis or deification, a share in the very life of God. So the whole tradition recognizes a distinction between nature and grace. The key question is, how are they related? What's the relationship between nature and grace? And more specifically, how do we preserve the right kind of openness in nature to a gift that's beyond nature, while at the same, so without collapsing grace into nature, but also preserving the radical gratuity of the gift of grace. So that question's always been there. At certain times, it becomes more explicit, like when Augustine has to battle against the Pelagian heresy, and emphasizing especially the Holy Spirit poured into our hearts that makes it possible for us to assent to God's grace and therefore receive the gift of salvation. At other times, after the Reformation, it became very important to confirm that nature is wounded by sin, but it's not totally corrupted. So a certain defense of the integrity of nature became necessary. Likewise, during the Christological disputes, the full integrity of Christ's human nature, in distinction from his divine nature, needed to be affirmed and protected by the church. So the question has always been there in the tradition. It in a way, it received a new emphasis in the 20th century, and here we're touching on the more contemporary debate, and that began especially with the publication in 1946 of a book by the French theologian, a French Jesuit, Henri de Lubac. So de Lubac is born in 1896. He enters the Jesuits just before World War I, is drafted into the French army, received some wounds during the war from which he suffers throughout his life. After the war, returns for his Jesuit formation. The Jesuits at this time had to study in England and on the Isle of Jersey because of the anti-clerical regime in France. But he's ordained a priest and takes up residency in Lyon-Fourvière, a Jesuit house just outside the city of Lyon, and begins teaching at the faculty in Lyon. And publishes his first major work is called Catholicism, the Social Aspects of Dogma, which was a kind of rehabilitation of the understanding of salvation as essentially communal or ecclesial. He also helped to reintroduce into Catholic theology the voice of the Church Fathers. So he helped to translate, edit, and publish many texts from the Church Fathers, especially the Greek Fathers. And this became a movement known as ressourcement, a return to Scripture and the Fathers, as well as high medieval theology, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Bonaventure. But then during the war, he began working on this question of the relationship between nature and grace, or as he termed it at the time, the supernatural. And the question he wanted to pose was, it may be the case that a certain tradition of commenting on Thomas Aquinas that became predominant in the 15th and especially the 16th century was not all that faithful to St. Thomas Aquinas on this question of the ultimate end of man. And the way this commentatorial tradition developed, partly to defend the gratuity of grace and the integrity of nature, a theory which Lubac calls the theory of pure nature began to predominate. And this theory says that nature, as originally created and constituted by God, has only a natural end. And that is an end that can be attained through our own natural capabilities, our powers, our potencies. Grace, the gift of grace, comes and bestows on us a new supernatural end. So we have nature created by God has a natural end. Grace comes and gives us a new and higher end, which will fulfill and perfect us. And the theory serves certain.
Well, can I stop you right there?
Sure.
This supernatural end. This is something, according to the theory of that the theory de Lubac calls pure nature.
Yeah.
When this supernatural finality is given to man, this isn't something that he ever could have conceived of in any way.
That's right. Is that right? Yeah. On this point, there's a real agreement. That is, the supernatural end is only attainable through a new gift of grace that goes beyond our nature and our constitution as a creature. But the theory of pure nature tends to emphasize that we have two final ends, and only with grace do we get a supernatural final end. And what Lubac argues, and I think he makes a fairly compelling case, that this theory is modern, and it's not faithful to the great tradition shared by Augustine and Thomas, which sees already at the very heart of nature an opening and a desire for union with God in the beatific vision. So Augustine's famous opening in the Confessions, you made us for ourselves, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And Thomas Aquinas shares this view in teaching that we have a natural desire to see the essence of God. We have a natural desire for the beatific vision. This is a paradox because, of course, the beatific vision is not something we can attain, as it were, by our nature. This is radically beyond our nature. But Lubac thinks it's an important insight of Aquinas to see an opening in nature to what's beyond nature. And this helps us understand that Christianity is both a gift from beyond nature. It is radically supernatural, but it also, in a certain way, discloses the deepest truth of why God created the world in the first place. There's a longing in the heart of man for something more that Christianity surpassingly fulfills. So, because you might say, well, what's the problem with the theory of pure nature? The problem is it can't display clearly enough the truth that Christianity gets to the real heart of the human heart. It's what we were made for. It's what we most deeply desire, and that when you proclaim the gospel, you're touching something that's in a way open and even longing for this truth.
So it seems like, hearing you explain this, it's starting to make more sense. Could you say that because of this openness in man to the work of God, that makes us a hopeful creature? The reason go ahead.
Yeah. No, I would say absolutely yes. And Joseph Pieper's
Yes,
great on this theme of
bingo.
hope.
Yeah, so that was we spoke before we pressed record about an interview that I did with Dr. Ryan Brown, who wrote a very engaging article on Plato and Pieper, and it was about hope, and it was about how human reason, has a hopeful structure. And afterwards, I got to thinking, like, well, it can't just be reason; then it must be the rest of our being. And so, what you're saying is sort of confirming that that if you have mankind has this openness to grace, it's because we have hope, and we have our ultimate beatitude to hope for. If it weren't for that, then we'd either be presumptuous, thinking our natural end is good enough, and what more do we need, or we'd be despairing. And so it seems like I didn't expect it to relate, but it relates to
Yeah.
this other episode that we did.
No,
So
thank you.
this is really beautiful.
I think that's a great insight, and maybe to just touch on what a good objection, a concern that's often addressed to de Lubac is that if you say that we have a natural desire for the beatific vision, for a graced union with God in heaven, haven't you somehow compromised the radical gratuity of grace? Because if we have a natural desire for something, well, then doesn't that somehow make it either a necessity that desire be fulfilled, or we have a claim on what should be a free gift? And in thinking through an answer to that, it's closely related to hope. Is what we desire most is a gratuitous gift. We want to be loved by another and to love in return, but that can only be received as a free gift. So the very structure of our desire is as it were receptive. We're open to the gratuitous gift from another, and that's what really satisfies the human heart, is in a way to be surprised by more than I deserve.
So we don't want God to be a tyrant who withholds from us this thing that we desire, but we also don't desire him to bestow it in a mechanical way, like, oh, I have to do this now. That would empty it of all meaning in a certain sense.
That's right.
So, okay, hearing you explain the problem.
And maybe to go back to the history of so
Sure.
de Lubac publishes this book in 1946. It's just after the war. There's a shortage of paper in France, but de Lubac had been very courageous during the war, participating in what he calls spiritual resistance to anti-Semitism, the Nazi regime, and the Vichy collaboration with the Nazis. So he had a lot of credibility as a courageous Christian witness. And he publishes this book, and it creates something of a firestorm. At one level, it's a very technical book, going through the way this word supernatural is used in commentators in the 15th, 16th, 17th century. But it's recognized as, in a way, a challenge to the predominant neo-scholastic synthesis. And a few years later, de Lubac is asked by his Jesuit superiors, he's required to stop teaching. And that book on the supernatural gets removed from Jesuit libraries. So there's a kind of silencing of de Lubac, which he's a very obedient man of the church. He accepts that requirement. But the question continues to generate interest, and he will, in later years, publish the books that are better known in English: The Mystery of the Supernatural and Augustinism in Modern Theology. He publishes those works in 1965, and then toward the end of his life, a brief catechesis on nature and grace. So, and in the meantime, de Lubac is in a way rehabilitated, is invited to help prepare for the Second Vatican Council, participates as a peritus at the council, and then receives a growing recognition on the part of it was really Pius XII, but then that continues with John the 23rd, Paul the 6th, and then John Paul II names him a cardinal of the church, and shows a great esteem for his theology. In the meantime, the debates surrounding nature and grace, that they've continued, and as I said, it's not a question that we will solve by just getting the right technical formula. In a way, it's how do we think most adequately about the relationship between the gift of creation and the new gift of redemption in light of the mystery of God's plan and the unity of God's plan.
Yeah, that is amazing. That's so beautiful. So at this point, then, I'm thinking to myself, how does anyone still disagree? I get that there's certain corners of the academic world, again, the broadly Thomistic or neo-scholastic position. I just don't comprehend. What's the breakdown in communication? But you said it's not a technical. It's not just, let me make sure I explain this a little better.
It's not just right. It's extremely difficult. So I would say, and this is where maybe we'll do this conversation again with Dr. Feingold. It'd be great to
that would be amazing.
Explore this together, because his book, which critiques de Lubac, but in a very thoughtful and helpful way. So I disagree with Dr. Feingold, but I think he's done a real service by a careful interpretation of Aquinas, and especially this tradition of commentary on Aquinas. And the concerns are twofold, and they're related. It's to make sure that we safeguard the integrity of nature, that there's a good scholastic formula that every Catholic should take to heart. Gratia supponit et perficit naturam. Grace presupposes and perfects nature. Another way to say that, grace presupposes, elevates, and perfects nature. And the concern would be if you argue with de Lubac that nature, already inscribed in nature, is this supernatural finality, it seems like you've made grace a kind of structural part of nature, which has two consequences. This is the concern, that you don't really have nature in its integrity. And if you don't have nature in its integrity, you haven't understood the generosity of the Creator and the way in which redemption presupposes creation. And on the other hand, you've somehow made grace a requirement. You've made grace a structural part of nature, and therefore it's no longer really of a different order. It's no longer radically supernatural, beyond nature. And these are good concerns, and therefore it's not wrong to take these concerns to heart, to go back, reread texts from Aquinas in light of the great tradition. And there you see, in Aquinas, it's not obvious. Some things are very clear. He says, every intellect has a natural desire to see the essence of God. Okay, but then what exactly is meant by a natural desire? Is it innate? Is it elicited? He'll say, in some places, very clearly gives an account of, as we have a finality that's proper and proportionate to our nature, but we also are made for supernatural beatitude. What's the relationship between those two finalities? These questions are extremely difficult.
Yes, indeed. Well, I was struck by part of your article. I forget which page exactly, but I think it's pretty early on. And you identify the Thomistic commentatorial tradition as having staked out a modern and new position. And I thought, that's going to ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, no, this is extremely important. So when we use the term Thomas, it's kind of fraught, because de Lubac, in all of his writings on nature and grace, claims to be interpreting and presenting the true thought of St. Thomas Aquinas, which he thinks is shared with St. Augustine and the great tradition prior to the 15th century. So it's not a Thomist position on one side, de Lubac's position on the other. These are rival ways of interpreting and reading St. Thomas Aquinas on this question.
Okay. So we should think of de Lubac as properly a Thomist also.
On this question, absolutely. Okay. Now again, he reads Thomas as a witness to a tradition that is greater, and therefore not as the either point of departure or the resolution of all questions and debate. So theology isn't clarifying what Thomas said, but thinking with Thomas about the true subject of theology, the mystery of God who has revealed himself in Christ. But on this particular question, he thinks it's actually of great help to attend carefully to Thomas's teaching on the ultimate end of man and the natural desire for the beatific vision.
So let's move into, I think it's section 2. Yes. Can you maybe more or less briefly unpack, like identify and then unpack de Lubac's 5 theses surrounding, this question? Maybe brief isn't the right word, but if we could just go through and wrap our minds around what does de Lubac say? That may help.
Sure. The first and in a certain way all-encompassing or most fundamental claim that de Lubac makes, and this is really the heart of his thinking about nature and grace, is that as created by God and for God, the ultimate end or the ultimate final end of human nature is supernatural beatitude. So we're made for union with God. That the plan of God in creating us is to bestow this supreme gift of a share in his own life and love. So there's a unity to God's plan for creation and redemption that has its center in the mystery of Jesus Christ. So this isn't always the technical way the debate is argued, but I think it's really the key to de Lubac's position is Christocentrism, that the mystery of Jesus Christ displays the plan of God for creation. So that's the first and all-encompassing claim or thesis, that the ultimate end of man is supernatural union with God. The second thesis is very traditional, and that is to attain this ultimate end, a new gift is needed that is not a constitutive part of our nature, and that new gift is grace. So there's not simply a continuum between nature and grace. They're not of the same order. There is a radical and abiding difference between our nature and the gift of grace, so that only through grace can we attain our ultimate end. So that, in a nutshell, is the second thesis. And on that second thesis, there's very little debate between de Lubac's reading of Aquinas and a neo-Thomist interpretation or a pure nature theory. The third thesis is stated in Thomistic language. There is a natural desire to see the essence of God, and here, and how we interpret that is where things get a little bit more contentious or more disputed. For de Lubac, Thomas's teaching on the natural desire to see God is a sort of sign of the first thesis on the plan of God for human nature, that our ultimate end is a supernatural end, that there's an opening at the very heart of nature to what's beyond nature. So we desire something that we can only obtain through a new and free gift from God. And that's where the objection is, if you say there's a natural desire for supernatural beatitude, you've somehow made grace a part of nature. That's the objection to Lubac. Okay, in my article, then the fourth thesis touches on, if someone has followed this debate over nature and grace, they'll know that in 1950, which was about the time de Lubac's Jesuit superiors silenced him and required that he stop teaching, that his books be pulled from libraries, there was an encyclical promulgated by Pius XII, Humanae Generis, which clarified that God, a hypothetical possibility, God could have created intellectual natures and not ordered and called them to supernatural beatitude. Now, at the time that was promulgated, many took that affirmation of Humanae Generis by Pius XII as a criticism of de Lubac. In fact, de Lubac at the time and subsequently said, actually, no, this is consonant with my teaching before the encyclical, after the encyclical. I don't object to it. I've said something very similar about God's freedom in creating, God's freedom in calling us to supernatural beatitude. So sometimes the debate is wrongly placed as, well, does de Lubac accept this hypothetical? He does accept the hypothetical. It doesn't function as prominently as resolving the question of nature and grace as it might for a proponent of pure nature. But that's what my fourth thesis touches.
Yeah. You even hear, I've heard, I mean, obviously wrongly, but there's like a myth or an urban legend out there that Humanae Generis was targeting and condemning de Lubac and those of his ilk. And I've read that encyclical a couple of times and it didn't get that impression at all. Do you any insight as to why?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, look, Pius XII is criticizing this position, but it's another thing altogether to say he condemned a theologian or a theologian's positions. That's far different than just criticism. Yeah. If that's even what it is. Like, I mean, you're saying not at all criticism, but
right.
Where do we get this notion of de Lubac being targeted?
No, thanks for the question. It's probably a complex history that it may be the case that those who were involved in the drafting, there may have been some who were hoping for an affirmation of the idea of pure nature together with a condemnation of de Lubac. But the text was revised, but it was, it was taken at the time, and there's this one passage which touches on the supernatural, but there was also more generally a concern in Humanae Generis to reaffirm the abiding importance of scholastic theology, Thomas Aquinas generally. So it was read as a correction to some ways in which contemporary theologians, especially in France, but also some in Italy, were criticizing the neo-scholastic synthesis. So, and then finally, a final reason might be if so Humanae Generis refers to this hypothetical. It's possible for God to create beings and not order and call and ordain them to the beatific vision. If in your thinking that hypothetical gives you the key to nature, then you're going to fasten on this and take it in as contrary to de Lubac. For de Lubac, the hypothetical is it's true that were we to deny it, we would be running into error. But it's in a way, it's not that significant or interesting. This kind of possibilism, this mode of arguing that became somewhat characteristic during the nominalist period, where there's an emphasis on divine power and what God could do. It has a very limited value in thinking through the intelligibility of the faith, which always has this sense of fittingness and gratuity, as distinct from a kind of strict logical necessity. So Lubac doesn't think this possibilism is that helpful. That is talking about hypothetical worlds, hypothetical orders. But if you hold to pure nature, you're going to place more emphasis on the hypothetical.
But nonetheless, he would agree with the hypothetical that, yeah, God could have. Okay,
That's
great.
right.
Thank
That's
you. All
right.
right, let's move. So in his mind and in mine, let's move on. What's the fifth?
Yeah.
The fifth one.
The fifth, and this is one probably where there's quite a bit of misunderstanding and mischaracterization of de Lubac. That is, it's very common because de Lubac criticizes the theory of pure nature. And as I said in my first thesis, that de Lubac argues that the ultimate end of human nature is supernatural beatitude. Mm-hmm. Some interpreters hear that and they think de Lubac denies that we have a natural end. De Lubac rejects any sense of our having an end proportionate to our nature, and that's in fact just not true. If you really carefully study the writings of de Lubac from every period from 1946 through his late brief catechesis on nature and grace, he does not reject the idea of a proportionate natural end. So it gets kind of subtle. He thinks it's not an ultimate end in the full and proper sense. So because God made us for an end that is beyond our nature, we can say, yeah, well, we can still talk about, well, what is proper to my nature? And then you realize there's a twofold end that we have inside of a single ordering to supernatural beatitude. So it's not wrong to identify, characterize an end that is proportionate to our nature, just as long as you recognize that end is always itself inside of it ordered to something more fundamental. God made us for more, and therefore it doesn't have the full characteristic of an ultimate end.
So this is something, excuse me, this was something that I was kind of pondering last night with a little bit of difficulty, reading through your article, and it occurred to me that the language, I think it's just English. At the end of the day, I think it's just our use of the term. However, it struck me as somewhat inappropriate to refer to the natural end as an end, because it strikes the listener or the reader in such a way that I think a misunderstanding. I mean, I had this misunderstanding before I thought it through. If it's the end, then there's nothing after, right? But that's only one way to conceive of the term. And so I thought, well, maybe I need to stop saying a natural end. Another way to frame end would be like telos, or goal.
That's right.
So we have a natural goal and we have a supernatural goal, and one of them obviously outshines the other. But if I reach my natural goal, I shouldn't think of it like, okay, I'm complete. There's more.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's, I was thinking, like, why would you say it's an end?
Yeah.
You can't call it an end because of this.
Yeah.
So, I read a little further and I thought it through, and it makes sense now. But I wonder, I'm not saying neo-scholastics misunderstand on that point, but I do wonder if the common man, such as me, if we maybe think, oh, de Lubac's denying, he's saying we have one ultimate end, then this is him collapsing it, grace into nature. I could see how that misunderstanding would play out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And maybe, no, thank you for that observation about a vulnerability in language to being misunderstood. It may be worth just clarifying, well, why would we talk about a natural end? And here it's just good to remember that we're made for something radically beyond our nature. So in Thomas Aquinas, one place where this will come, he'll contrast the happiness that was available to, say, the Greek philosophers before the coming of Christ, and he'll compare that to what, in fact, God wishes to share with us in terms of a beatitude that is a partaking of the divine nature. And I'll say that the kind of knowledge of God that was available to an Aristotle was he could know God from his created effects. So Aristotle came to a real knowledge that God, the first principle, exists, and that knowledge in a way is proportionate to our reason, proportionate to human nature. But then you recognize, but you know what? God made us for more, and the kind of knowledge that we have in the beatific vision is radically beyond that. And to emphasize the radical beyondness, you can contrast that supernatural end with an end that is proportionate to our nature, say the knowledge of God that Aristotle had. But then when you make that comparison, you then realize the knowledge of God that Aristotle had, it doesn't really satisfy the human heart. And even the fascinating, even Aristotle glimpsed it. These beautiful lines at the end of the Nicomachean Ethics that we should really strive for the divine, but in a way it's beyond us. That there's a glimpse in Aristotle and an opening to something more that then is fully revealed and disclosed only with the Christian mystery.
Amen. All right, so moving on then, let's we could probably skip section 3 if that's convenient for you.
Sure.
Because you've sort of already covered that, the debate over, the finer points. And maybe one of these days we should definitely revisit this with Dr. Feingold. Folks, if you didn't catch the last episode, Larry's a friend of mine. He lives not far. And now that Nick and I are acquainted, a three-way discussion might just be absolutely in order. But I want to get to this application of the dynamic between nature and grace as it pertains to marriage, because I think you mentioned in the introductory pages that you hope that this sort of advances the debate a little bit, and I think it does. So I'd like to give you as much time and latitude as needed to explain what is going on here in section 4 and how does it contribute to this timeless question.
Sure. And so maybe just to state what I think, where I think there's a kind of unresolved question, or where the debate stands now. And it's subtle, because on the one hand, as I said at the beginning, we're always going to be thinking about and discussing nature and grace. And then also the debate at some level, it seems like why are they still disagreeing? These are Orthodox Catholics that are obedient to the magisterium. They love the tradition as a whole. They recognize Thomas Aquinas as the Doctor Communis, the common doctor. Where's the disagreement? And the disagreement, I think it in the end, so we all recognize a distinction between nature and grace. We all recognize in some way that only with grace do we have full and perfect beatitude, a perfect ultimate end. The disagreement is, how do we understand the openness within nature to what's beyond nature? So in a way, it's going to be a dispute about the concept of nature, the nature of nature, how we understand nature as a final cause, what's the ultimate end of nature. And in pursuing this question, I've found the question of marriage is extremely illuminating, and it's both helpful for thinking about nature and grace, especially the relationship between natural marriage and sacramental marriage. But then it's also the case, as I think all of us know in some sense, we're in the midst of an anthropological crisis right now in our culture, and there is a massive confusion about the human being as created as man or woman in the image of God. There's confusion about what marriage is, and even in the church, confusions about the indissoluble bond of marriage. So there are many reasons to think about marriage as a paradigmatic instance of the relationship between nature and grace. And John Paul II said just this. He says, if we understand the sacramentality of marriage, we'll have a new perspective for understanding the relationship between nature and grace. And briefly, it's a really fascinating question to pose. What's the sense of marriage as a sacrament? And marriage is different from all the other sacraments in this respect. With the other sacraments, the form, every sacrament is a union of matter and form. The form of the sacrament, most often the words spoken by the minister, that comes with Christ. He inaugurates this new sacramental order. We have the very clear words, "Go and do likewise. I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." And you can do something analogous with all of the sacraments. The form comes with the mystery of Christ. But marriage is unique in the way marriage already existed prior to the coming of Christ. And after the coming of Christ, in one respect, marriage is the same. You still have a man and a woman exchanging vows. So it's a really interesting question. So what does it mean to say marriage is a sacrament? What's sacramental about marriage? What does this sacramental grace, what does it, as it were, add to marriage? And the answer is very subtle. It doesn't add just a part or a piece. In a certain way, what's sacramental about marriage is marriage itself. This whole created reality is taken into the mystery of Christ's union with the church, so as to be a real symbol, a sacramental participation in Christ's love for the church. Okay, and so if we go back to the question of nature and grace, there's a way in which already within the order of creation, there's a foreshadowing of God's plan to recapitulate all things in Christ. Already in marriage, there's a kind of opening to this mystery of Christ's union with the church. This is seen in the Church Fathers. This is even affirmed by Thomas Aquinas, who sees the first marriage in paradise as a proleptic symbol, an anticipation of Christ's union with the church. On the other hand, if you then look at the side of grace and the mystery of marriage as a sacrament, you see there's no way for the church to esteem the sacrament of marriage without taking the natural reality of marriage very seriously. That the church has a stake in defending natural marriage, because it's precisely that natural reality that enters into the sacramental economy. So that's one way in which we can think about the relationship between nature and grace in light of the unity of God's plan for creation and redemption. But there's also a second way, and this might be worth trying to clarify together. One of the problems of the theory of pure nature is it sees the end of nature can only be proportionate to nature. It has to be something that nature, as it were, can attain by itself. So this principle of proportionality is very important. And if you go to marriage, you realize there's already within nature, there's an opening to something more. It's like, what's the end of marriage? It's the procreation, education of children. But immediately that opens up a profound way of thinking about what exactly do we mean by end. Are the children caused by my nature? Yes and no. In one sense, there has to be an opening to this, so much so that if you exclude procreation from marital consent, you're not really married. On the other hand, every parent knows a child is a radically new gift that exceeds my causality. I'm not the cause of the being of the child. I receive the child as a gift from God. So already there, in a way, within the created order, you have this idea of an opening at the heart of nature to what's beyond nature. So the child coming as the fruit, it's both the end, but it surpasses the union of man and woman, which then is an analogy to the supernatural. Really is the end of nature, but it radically surpasses nature. And we have a kind of foreshadowing of that in marriage, in a way, which is the most natural thing, and the end of marriage being the procreation and education of children.
And so we've got in this one mystery, this one sacrament, these two, I guess not in the sacrament proper, but in this reality that is marriage. You've got these two dynamics that exist side by side, and the one elevates the other, but it doesn't disfigure it or destroy it or like replace it, right? It's still there. The natural goods and the natural goals, the natural telos of marriage is still in place, but then you've added something, or you've unlocked a door, right?
Yeah,
I hate
exactly.
to say added, but
yeah, that's extremely. What's the difference between a sacramental marriage and a natural marriage? You in a certain way, your instinct is exactly right. A sacramental marriage is more authentically a marriage. In a way, this is displaying and realizing the full truth of what marriage was always meant to be in the plan of the Creator, which is the union of man and woman open to new life. But now this union of man and woman open to the gift of new life has been taken into and is a real representation of Christ's love for the church. So you have something both radically beyond nature to be a sacramental representation of Christ's love for the church. But you also have, in a way, now nature attaining its full truth and capacity. You know, it's a sacramental marriage is more properly a marriage. And that's why you see, you can do this with any of the features of marriage. Take, for example, indissolubility. A natural marriage is indissoluble. That's always been affirmed by the church. But the most radical and strictest note of indissolubility is attained in a sacramental marriage, validly ratified and consummated.
So this seems like it has. There's no way this isn't related. So I'm just jotting down some notes. In the example, in the way you're explaining natural marriage and sacramental marriage, of course, the idea is to tie it back to the foundational question we began with, that of nature and grace. And so on this disputed point of whether and how man is open to supernatural beatitude, it seems to me that one objection against the neo-scholastic position might be that, and along the lines, again, with marriage that you're describing here, if we say that your desire to see God is something that's superimposed and it comes from the outside, that it's not a part of human nature, then when you receive that desire, again, from God through grace, you've been changed in a way that makes you not the thing you just were. it's sort of like I'm not explaining this very well,
Yeah,
but in order to appreciate man in his integrity, I have to add something to man
yeah,
to
yeah.
make
No,
him more integrated. Well, wait a minute. Wouldn't it be more fitting? Isn't it more proper that God has created us to be the kind of thing that desires this gift and is capable of receiving it, rather than God has made me like enclosed in this natural world, and because again, because of grace, right, which we should be thankful for, he comes down and like plugs me into some supercharger or something.
yeah, yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. And this is to try and simplify this discussion of nature and grace, or again return. Why does this matter? In a way, it's the saints that are most truly human. We see in the mystery of grace and the life of grace the very heart of God's plan for nature, for creation. That the Christian mystery doesn't add something simply from outside, but it displays the original plan of God for creation. And this has a bearing on how we think about the church's relationship to human culture more generally. Why that Christianity is not just this private faith, or it doesn't just pertain to a part of my life, this sort of supernatural realm, but it bears on who I am. It bears on how I understand the meaning of work, education, family. So the church has both a claim on and an interest in a renewal of the whole order of creation. So as you say, in some sense, and this is the paradox, the real heart, you want to see nature in its fullness. You look to the incarnate Son and Mary, the Immaculate Mother of God. There you see nature display. The Immaculate Conception is in a way the key to nature.
So it seems like I'm going to throw you like a metaphysical curveball here. How much or how little of this is tied up in the notion of relation as a transcendental rather than as an accident? It seems to me that the idea that relationality is constitutive of being is absolutely foundational for an understanding that to be like you said a moment ago, paraphrasing, you're most human when you're in the communion of saints, right, with God in heaven and your brethren, because that's a relation that exists. It's not something that is optional or could be jettisoned. But going back to de Lubac's book Catholicism, like if we're not all saved together, are we really saved? And so it's this relationality between us and God and our fellow man that seems like it adds something to this very question, right? That again, once you see it, it's hard to not see it. So
Yeah.
I throw my lot in with de Lubac more or less all the way. But what are your thoughts on relationality as it bears on this question?
Yes, I mean, I agree with your comments here and your line of thinking. And this, at one level, this would follow from an adequate sense of the truth of creation, the mystery of creation. To be a creature of God is to receive our being as a gift from God, and in bestowing on us the gift of our being, we are constitutively in relation to God, and we're made for union with Him. So this relationality opens up the heart of what it means to be a substance, to be in nature, and it would offer a way of thinking more about the relation between nature and freedom, between my nature and its final end. So all of these questions would be enriched by an adequate metaphysics of creation, which in my view is that being is a gift from God, and we're made for communion.
To your knowledge, has anyone produced a monograph or a longer book on this, or maybe there are articles that I could reference? This seems like, I don't want to overplay my hand here, but this kind of seems like the sort of thing that DC Schindler's up to.
Yeah, I was going to say you took the words out of my mouth. My colleague DC Schindler and a dear friend Adrian Walker, I think, have both written on this theme. Adrian Walker has an older essay in Communio that would definitely be worth rereading, and if you can have him on the show to discuss, it would be great. But he knows St. Thomas's thought very well. He loves Aristotle, but he also is thinking about the idea of creation as a gift, and creation as a gift, of course, culminates in the sublime truth. We're created in the image of God, who is triune love. So God's being love also, in some sense, is both the origin and the end of all of these questions of the meaning of nature, the meaning of grace. So DC Schindler's book.
Could you send me the title?
Yeah, the title is like
the link to the article,
and personal.
I can put it in the notes.
I'll be happy to send you the
great.
And maybe a few other things by Adrian Walker. And then there's also a short volume that's kind of a classic that I'd recommend any listeners to get a copy of and read, and that's by Kenneth Schmitz. It's called Creation, the Gift, or The Gift for short. And it's a great meditation on the idea of gift and the metaphysics of Thomas Aquinas. Okay,
excellent. Nick, is there any what can we say by way of conclusion? I want to be respectful of your time. I can hear the clowns waking up for the Fowler family circus.
Yeah. Maybe just a final thought that this is a little bit beyond the Lubac, but I find it helpful just in thinking about this question of nature and grace, and that is to go back to Christology. And when we think of this scholastic axiom, grace presupposes and perfects nature, to really think of the mystery of Christ as displaying that axiom in its fullness. And what this means, sometimes in our thinking, we'll see Jesus Christ, well, he represents grace, and we have to sort of work out how he relates to nature. But it's better and more profound than that. He, in a way, displays both sides of the relationship. He displays not only the gift of grace, but also the full stature and integrity of nature. So Christ displays the truth of nature, the truth of grace, but also without any confusion. So I would encourage thinking about this question of nature and grace in light of the hypostatic union, as displaying both the integrity of nature, the new gift of grace, and the union without confusion.
Beautiful. Sorry, I had the wrong button there. Well, I think with that, we probably should conclude. One final question that I always like to ask the guests, and since you're now the fourth person, for folks in my position, right? I'm not properly an academic, but I'm also I'm no slouch. Like, what kind of things could or should I be reading? Right? I always recommend Communio. Feingold recommended Nova et Vetera. C. Hauser recommended something, I forget. What's your recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for the recommendation of Communio. So as an editor of Communio, I would love for more subscribers, readers. But I think also my co-editor in some books that he's been writing, David Schindler, is just really a representative of outstanding Catholic philosophy. He's really thinking both from the heart of the tradition, but also in response to the most urgent questions of our time. So I would recommend his book, Love and the Postmodern Predicament, for example. But any books by Schindler are worth reading. His book on Plato is also highly recommended. So those are a couple of suggestions.
And that was Plato's critique of impure reason?
That's right.
Okay. All right. Got it. Okay. Cue the music. Sake. I hope for anyone who hears this, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Is that better? I'll turn this down. There we go. It's just for dramatic effect. You know how these things go. Well, I would be remiss, again, if I didn't say to the listeners, please support what I'm doing here. Canon 211 is my family's attempt at bringing Christ to the world and the world to Christ, one soul at a time. It's canon211.locals.com. You can sign up for free if you're so inclined. Support me on a monthly or yearly basis so that I can continue to have guests such as the esteemed Dr. Nicholas J. Healy. Dr. Healy, once more, thank you. And more to come. If you can hang out a moment, we'll chat. I want to get some of these references down for the show notes. And there we have it. So, as we always do on the Paleocrat Diaries, never give up. Keep on smiling. And memento mori.